So welcome to my live stream, the first one in 2021. I hope you guys had an awesome New Year's Eve celebration. I hope that you're healthy and that you're excited about the year ahead. I know I'm really excited about 2021, excited to turn the page on 2020. And I'm back again for my weekly live streams, which I haven't done in a while. And today I'm going to be talking about something that has come up a lot lately, which is the role of positivity in marriage and the role of that ratio of positive to negative. If you've heard my webinar, you know that I focus a lot on the 5-to-1 ratio that was discovered by Dr. John Gottman, and why it's so important to expand the positive interactions and not get so caught up on eliminating every single negative thing in the marriage before you can enjoy the positive, because what we focus on expands, right? So what you're focusing on, if you stay in the world of the problem and feel like you can't, enjoy your relationship unless every single problem is solved, then you stay stuck in that problem and you get really like myopic and overly focused on that. And so what we have to do is build on what's going well and increase that ratio. And apparently the 5-to-1 ratio, getting to that 5-to-1 of positive to negative, is the turning point, according to the research of Dr. John Gottman. Once you get to 5-to-1, and that's defined by you and your spouse, it's very subjective, you are on solid footing and you're no longer like questioning, is this going to work? Is this really, did I marry the right person? How long can I do this? All of those doubts about what's possible for you go away once you get to that ratio. Now, ideally, you would get to like 20-to-1, but 5-to-1 is really where the turning point is, where you get from being on shaky ground to solid footing. Then there's always, of course, room for improvement, and there's always things we can continue growing on. But that's the magic number. So in working with people on this, I get a lot of questions about this because a lot of people have a hard time with like the focusing on the positive because, number one, it feels like we're ignoring the negative. Does it mean that we're sweeping things under the rug? Does it mean that we're being like a pollyanna, right? Like just focusing on the positive to the point of being delusional. But the first thing I want to say about this is the reason why we have to start with the positive versus negative thing is that that is the most measurable, observable, manageable way that we can actually track our progress every single day and over time. And so if we track that and we can see overall the number of interactions that are positive, they're going up, or the time in between the negative interactions is getting longer, or the amount of time that we're spending in a negative interaction or disconnection is getting shorter, that's all signs of progress, right? So we want to be able to track that and be able to recognize the big picture, because if we backslide a little bit, it's easy to go back into thinking this is how it's always going to be, it's never going to change, and we lose perspective when we're in disconnection. So we have to focus on that ratio, because that's the thing that we can actually track and help us keep a big picture view. Also, the reason why we have to focus on that is because what we believe is directly going to impact what it is that we have in our life, right? So if we have limiting beliefs about what's possible that we maybe inherited growing up, thinking that, healthy love wasn't for us, that's not what we had in our family, that's not what was modeled for us, that's not what we've had yet in our lives, then we might have limiting beliefs about what's possible. And so whatever we have in our lives, whatever the printout of your life is right now, on some level is something that on some level, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, you believe that is what you deserve, or that is what you believe is how it's supposed to be, that is somehow in your comfort zone, or you wouldn't have that experience. So even though consciously you might be thinking, well, this isn't what I want, on some level it is, or you wouldn't be having this experience. So that's one of the operating beliefs or assumptions that I build my whole program on, is that our beliefs are going to completely determine what it is that we can create in our lives. And so if what we have in our lives is not working for us, it's not what we desire, then we have to change our beliefs. That's going to be more in line with what our goals are, right? And so we have to change those thoughts that we're having day to day, because if you think about it, a belief is just a thought that we have over and over again. So a thought is just the reinforcement of that belief. If you're having a thought often, it's probably because you have a belief that is the same as that thought. And so by changing those repetitious thoughts into something different over time, as well as some unconscious belief change work, that's how we can actually shift our beliefs. But with this premise, and I'm not getting into the how to do that today, but what I've noticed is when I talk to people about thinking positively, changing our beliefs to be more positive, more affirming and more supportive of our goals, there's two things that come up with that. Number one is that people confuse emotions and thoughts. And so if they start to have a negative emotion, they get really freaked out and they think, well, I'm not actually, shoot, I'm ruining it, right? I'm having a negative emotion. That means I'm ruining what it is that I'm trying to create by having this negative emotion. And that's actually not true, right? There's a difference between our emotions and our thoughts, and we can have negative emotions without ruining what the positive thinking is that we're trying to habituate in our psyche. But what people get tripped up on is if they don't recognize the difference between their thoughts and their emotions, then they end up feeling like they have to ignore the emotions, because if they let themselves have those emotions, then they're not thinking positively, so they just like try to bypass that. And that keeps you stuck in low vibe. So even though you're telling yourself that you're not feeling a certain way, or even though you're telling yourself a positive thought, you're still feeling bad, like in your gut or in your body. It's not going to work. And then people start to get really discouraged and frustrated and beating themselves up. And then they're having a negative emotion and a negative thought process about the fact that they're having a negative emotion. And it like spirals out of control. And I see this all the time, that people get really concerned about this and beating themselves up. The other thing I think that gets in the way is that if people start to think that if I'm focusing on positive thinking, if I'm trying to change my thinking and focusing on the positive, then I'm just ignoring the truth of, I'm being delusional, right? I'm not being realistic. I am just focusing on the positive, shoving the negative under the rug, and it's going to come back later to bite me. And so it's actually not helpful to focus on the positive, because then I'm not being realistic. The first thing I want people to be aware of is that nothing that I do with my clients is actually realistic. Nothing that we do to create new outcomes is realistic, because realistic is just using the past as a guide for what you think you can have in the future, right? Nothing new is ever created by being realistic. Being realistic is putting the past in front of you, right? So that's the first thing that I think people have to recognize. And then the second thing to keep in mind is that thinking positive is simply moving your awareness to things that are already true, that are positive, that you're overlooking. It's not that you're making stuff up. It's not that you're fabricating positive things in your life. It's that you're just bringing your attention to something else that's true, that is positive. And it's like a reconditioning of what you're bringing your attention to repetitively throughout the day. This is why there's actually a scientific link, and you can research this on your own. There's a scientific link between daily gratitude, which is focusing consciously on what you're grateful for, which is not making anything up. It's just looking at what's already true in your life. There's a link between that and greater happiness, well-being, health, and financial abundance. And this is actually scientifically proven. It's that we, through repetitively looking for something positive to focus on, we're changing your perceptual filter. We're changing the neural network in your brain over time. And we have to do that anyway, because if you think about it, every day there's like 1 billion bits of information that come into our experience, that we are exposed to that much information every single day. And we have to filter things out. Like, in order to get through the day, we're always filtering things out, and we're already choosing what we're noticing and what we're not noticing, what we're letting in and what we're choosing to pay attention to, and what we're not choosing to pay attention to. And those filters, unfortunately, are largely unconscious and largely formed in like the first 7 years of our life. And then but even after that, between ages like 7 and 22, if you have any bad experiences in that period of time, that will reinforce any filter that you already have. And so We actually have to consciously change what we notice in order to change our filter and change our narrative. And when we change our narrative, we change our life. Our narrative of the world and what we choose to notice from within that narrative, and the things that we focus on, that we bring out of this mass of bits. Like if you think about like a mass of information about your day or about your week, you're always selecting what you remember and putting that into a story. When you recap your history, when you tell somebody about your week, you're already always doing that. But if you notice what you link together into the narrative and how that makes you feel and what you then do tomorrow, there's actually a connection. So by changing what we focus on, we are changing the narrative and we're changing our life experience. So it's really important, and you don't have to make things up. You don't have to shove things under the rug. And I'm going to get into what the solution is here in just a minute, because I think that gets to be really confusing. There's a couple things. Number one is you want to, first of all, recognize, and this is a trick. This is something that I think is not something that we are taught, that we actually can have a negative emotion without moving into negative thinking. We have to be able to separate the emotions from the thoughts, right? So for example, let's say you are feeling really sad about something. Let's say there was something really disappointing that happened in your relationship this week or last year. If you think about just the emotion of the disappointment of that and you go into that feeling, you'll notice that it's more of a physiological thing, like disappointment or sadness or whatever the emotion is something that you can feel physiologically, and you can have that pure emotion without the reinforcement of the thinking behind it. So for example, let's say you've gone through a breakup and you're grieving the breakup and you're sad about the breakup. There's a difference between just feeling the loss of the relationship and feeling sad about the loss of the relationship and thinking, why does this always happen to me? I'm never going to have a healthy relationship. This is always how it goes. What did I do wrong? Why me? Like that kind of negative thinking, the questions that we're asking ourselves, the thoughts that we're telling ourselves, that's what keeps us stuck in the negative emotion. And the negative emotion won't pass through us if we reinforce it with the negative thinking. But if we can just let ourselves feel in our bodies the disappointment and the grief and the loss and the frustration and the fear, even the fear about the future, just feeling the fear, as opposed to reinforcing it with the thoughts, that's the first thing that we have to do. Another example would be, and this comes up all the time, in relationships, if you have an argument with your spouse, or let's just say there's an unmet need that you have in your relationship, it's really tempting to feel disappointment if you're not lining up. Let's say you wanted to have a connection. Let's say you wanted to have intimacy. Let's say you wanted to have some family time and your spouse just wasn't lining up with you on that. They didn't want the same thing that you wanted in that moment. And so now you're feeling disappointment. We tend to make meaning out of that and take that as rejection. Or what does that mean about them? That could mean that they are selfish. That could mean that they don't want the same things that we want. That could mean that they're rejecting me. That's a thought process. That's not an emotion, right? So you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm thinking? Like, what is the meaning that I'm giving this experience, and figuring out what the thought is. So there's two things that you can do to kind of separate them out. Number one is you ask yourself, okay, what would it be like to feel the hurt that I have or the anger that I have without the belief that I have behind it? So how would it feel to just have the disappointment without the rejection, right? Or if you think about anger, the emotion of anger, it comes from a belief that there's injustice. And fear comes from the belief that we are somehow in danger, or that we are not safe, or that the future is not safe. And so if you can separate out and go, what is the assumption that is behind my emotional experience right now, we can have a better understanding of how to separate those out. Another example would be like, okay, if I'm going to write down what my feelings are, and I notice that I'm describing the emotion in terms of an interpretation about the other person, that's not actually an emotion, and that's a common thing. So I'll hear couples say, well, I'm just feeling really disrespected right now. I'm feeling disregarded. Technically, that's not, and my clients get annoyed with me over time because I'm always saying this, that's not an emotion. That is a belief. You believe that you have been disregarded. You believe you have been disrespected. The emotion is going to be either anger or fear or hurt, right? Or if you say, I feel abandoned, it's not technically an emotion. That's technically a belief. So if you look up and just Google what are the 7 primary emotions, you're going to find there's not that many primary emotions. Most of the time you can boil your emotions down to that. And I will post an emotion wheel in this group later where you can see like an outgrowth of all of the nuances of emotions that come from those 7 primary emotions if you want to get more detailed about what you're feeling, so that you can tune into the feeling of it and then you can move into that and let it pass through you. Because if you don't let the emotion pass through you, you're not going to be able to go back to positive thinking. Okay? So the first thing is you have to give yourself permission to feel, which is physical. And one of the things I highly recommend, aside from looking up the primary emotions and checking out the emotion wheel that I'm going to post later today or after this live stream, and committing to emotional literacy for yourself and understanding what your feelings are and how to name those feelings and to own those feelings and to know that those feelings are coming from an interpretation of what is happening that may or may not be true, and separating those out. That's the first step. But I also highly recommend a book called Letting Go, and I think it's Dr. David Hawkins. You may have to look that up, but it's called Letting Go. And you can find it on Google or Amazon or whatever. I recommend supporting your local bookshop if you want to get it instead of Amazon, and support the mom and pop shops to get it if you want to buy it. But it gives you the actual mechanics, the how-to, the physical process that you can go through to hone in on your emotions, feel them, and release them. The only way to release them is to feel them, and to know that they're not going to take over you, you're not going to die, you're not going to lose yourself. If you weren't taught how to do that, it's probably terrifying and you feel not safe having that. But once you recognize, no, the only way through, or the only way out is through, if you can let yourself have those emotions and then come out the other side, then you're emotionally clear, and then you can move back into positive thinking and starting to intentionally move into more balanced thinking around your relationship and around your value and around what's possible, around your vision, and just around what you're willing to or what you're able to show up doing today in service of your vision. If you have New Year's resolutions about your relationship, if there's things you're trying to do differently, this is going to help you a lot. Then the other thing you want to do is, once you have your feelings and you've allowed yourself to move into the negative emotion, knowing that as long as you don't reinforce that with negative thinking or negative meaning making, that it's not going to harm you. It's not going to, a lot of you guys I know are on board with law of attraction. You understand how manifesting works. You understand the power of your physiological energetic vibration. And I think there's a lot of fear around, well, if I have this emotion, then I'm bringing down my vibes and then I'm not going to get what it is that I'm trying to create. But actually, if you don't let yourself have your emotions separate from your thoughts, you're going to be carrying it in your body anyways. So you want to, after you clear out those emotions, obviously let yourself have those, then you're going to notice you're going to feel better physiologically. After a really good cry, you feel lighter, you feel more balanced. Like, you know what, it's going to be okay. You can you can't think greater than you feel, right? So if you are stuck with emotion in your thought process, you have to clear it out, and then you move into better feeling thoughts. But I think another thing that gets difficult for people is if you are going through a period of darkness and you're feeling a lot of heaviness or sadness or hopelessness, it's really hard to just in one fell swoop move from despair into joy and gratitude in one thought. You can't just do that, right? You have to be willing to move into baby steps and give yourself permission to move into better feeling thoughts incrementally. And the book Letting Go by David Hawkins talks about this. It actually has a scale of emotions. And you can recognize where you are on that scale, and then identify where you are and say, all right, what do I have to think, or what do I have to notice, or what do I have to believe, or what do I have to observe or remember to move into the next level up, just step by step. And you can consciously lead yourself into better feeling thoughts within a few minutes. You can do this within like 10 minutes. But where people get overwhelmed is if they're like, I'm trying to think positive, but I just don't have hope, or I'm trying to be grateful, but I just don't feel that. That's okay. Feel what you feel first, separate it from the meaning, feel it physically. Then when you're clear, then you can go, what's the next best feeling thought that I can reach for? Even if it's as simple as, well, the last time we went through this, we did resolve it. The last time I had this conflict with my spouse, we did resolve it 2 days later. So I take solace in knowing that I can be okay for 2 more days, and we will come together in 2 more days. Even though I'm feeling really uncomfortable in disconnection now, I know that there's a way, and I know that I'm going to be okay in the meantime, right? That's just an example, but you find something that works for you. You have to find something that is personal to you that you can get on board with. Picking something that is already true, that you don't have to convince yourself of. That's why gratitude is so important. You start with what you're grateful for now, that's already true. And then when you're thinking about those things, like I think about my cats, which is silly, but I have 4 cats. And every time I look at them, I think they're so cute and I love them so much. And it makes me feel love when I think about them. So then if I think about that long enough and how grateful I am for them and how they're healthy and how they play together and how 2 of them snuggle together, and I feel so good about that, then it allows me to feel that like for like 15 seconds, 30 seconds. Then I can move into bigger things that I'm grateful for, or things that I'm grateful for that I don't yet have, but that I'm in the process of creating. So you can actually start to feel grateful for the relationship that you're going to have, that you are creating now in the work that you're doing. Even though not all of it is here yet, you can be grateful for the evidence and the sign that you are on your way. So we have to be easier on ourselves, take the pressure off ourselves, to constantly be thinking positive. We cannot plaster positive thoughts on top of negative emotion, but we also cannot bypass that emotion, and there really is no other way. I don't feel like most of us in this society, at least in my generation, were raised in school or even in higher education, unless you were actually studying psychology. You weren't going to be taught how to manage emotions. You weren't going to be taught emotional literacy. You weren't going to be taught the different thought structures that are behind each emotion. And to be able to understand our internal landscape takes work. It takes a learning curve. And we get scared of that and we feel overwhelmed by it. So we just want to repress it and push it away. But emotions don't leave. They just get lodged in the body somewhere until later on. They manifest as illnesses. They manifest as being stuck in depression. They manifest as continuing to sabotage ourselves. And so we cannot bypass it. And I think that's the most important thing. And when I hear people say, well, isn't thinking positive or focusing on changing our beliefs and just arbitrarily picking some kind of positive belief, isn't that just lying to ourselves? Isn't that just making something up and being totally delusional? And I don't think it is. I think that it is creating a new reality, and that's the only way, because already the beliefs we inherited were just as arbitrary as what we could ever pull out of a hat right now, right? The circumstances that we were born into, the situations that we internalized, that we hardwired into our psyches as truth about who we are, truth about what the world is like, truth about what love is. All of that was arbitrary. It just doesn't feel that way because you happen to already internalize that when we're a child. We are in a dreamlike state and our brain waves just absorb everything, and it just becomes like internalized in our gut, which is why when we tell ourselves something consciously, but we don't feel it in our gut, we're going to be fighting against ourselves. And so what we really have to do is not just think something that is just staying right here. We have to internalize that into our body, into our gut, into every cell in our body, so that we start to operate from the assumptions and the expectations of more positive beliefs that support the life that we want to have and the relationship that you're trying to create. That's really where it starts. And so I hope that this clarifies, because it comes up a lot in like either poo-pooing positive thinking as a very superficial mechanism, which it can be if we are bypassing. I agree. If we're bypassing emotions, then that's not going to work. And it also results in a lot of really heart-centered, empathic, insightful people who have already had help. You might have already had therapy. You might already recognize what your triggers are. You might already have so much insight around what it is that why you are where you are and what it is that you want to create. And I find that people like that are the ones that are the most hard on themselves in feeling like they should already be where they aren't yet. Or if they can't just instantly will themselves to adopt a completely new belief system, and if it doesn't feel effortless, and if they can't just think a thought and suddenly feel it in their gut, that they're somehow doing it wrong. And so I think we have to ease up and get really realistic in that regard. Not realistic in terms of that your past in your relationship is not a yardstick for what's possible in the future. When I say realistic, what I'm talking about is knowing how the psyche works and knowing that it is very difficult to leap from hopelessness and despair to hope and rose-colored glasses in one thought or in 1 hour. But you can still get there over time through practice and repetition. Just like if you were going to go to the gym and try to build some biceps, you're going to have to do that more than once. You're going to have to do that systematically. You're going to have to be careful what you put in your body, right? And it's the same with our thoughts. If we're going to change our life and our relationships, we have to think of the thoughts that we think as a diet for our mind, and eliminating toxic thoughts, and or at least recognizing them and course correcting them and shifting into something more balanced and a little bit more positive, little by little, is going to separate our automatic response from our future. We don't want our automatic responses dictating our future. If we allow that to happen, then you might as well just hang it up right now, because you'll never be able to create something new. We have to be able to unhook that. And so it's through our mind, it's through the positive thinking, it's through the changing of our beliefs, and moving into not just changing our beliefs at the subconscious level, but consciously noticing the positive in our relationship that we already have, things that we might overlook, things that we might filter out and take for granted and think, well, yeah, but that's how it should be. That's no big deal. A lot of people don't have the things that we think everyone should have. Like, a lot of times we overlook something that we think is no big deal, but it is actually something to celebrate, and it is actually something to, feel good about, because then you're more likely to notice, all the other things that you're overlooking and being like, oh, wow. And every time I ask somebody, my clients, I ask them to celebrate every time we meet. They might be coming on the call feeling really upset because they just had an argument and all they can think about is how this is always the same. But when I ask them to think about something to celebrate, usually they can always find, well, actually, there was a couple things there. He did show up differently this week. He did do something really sweet this week. I noticed he did apologize for this thing. And it's like, oh, look at that. How easy we overlook, and just filter out the positive. So that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about fabricating and making something up that isn't real. We're just talking about changing your filter and changing your belief structure, so that you can receive and allow better experiences to come into your relationship, or to hold a boundary on certain patterns that are destructive, or to stand strong in yourself and not feel guilty about those things. Whatever that is for you, there's so many different ways that can show up. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to go and just check to see if you guys have any questions about this. I wanted to just clarify and really articulate what the role of positivity is in a healthy marriage, especially in transforming a marriage from a marriage that is on the brink to a marriage that is really healthy for life. The role of positivity is very important, but I don't want anybody getting it twisted and thinking that it's about making something up or being delusional or being a Pollyanna. So I'm just going to check to see. Now, if you have any questions, if you feel like, you know what, I get it, I've done this, I've tried this, and I'm really stuck, and you want support and you want to explore support for your relationship, you can book a call with either me or one of my amazing coaches at monikahoyt.com/talk. It's monikahoyt.com/talk. And it's just a free call. It's a 45-minute call where we can really get clear on what is standing in your way, what are the barriers, what is it that you want to create, and if it's something that we can help you with, we'll let you know. If it's something that we're not the best fit for, we'll point you in the right direction. We'll get you to who can or give you the right resources. But either way, we'll get some clarity on the call. So I'll post the link below as well. Thanks for tuning in, you guys, and Happy New Year.